Good afternoon and welcome to our meeting of Brampton's Budget Committee, Day 1. All members are present today with the following participating remotely or absent. I believe Councillor Vasante will be leaving shortly to go online, and Councillor Singh, Deputy Mayor Singh, is online. Is that correct? Everyone else is here in person. Our next item is the approval of the agenda. Does any member wish to add a business item to today's meeting? Councillor Fortini.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to declare a conflict on the budget portion for the bylaws.
We're not at the conflict portion yet.
Okay.
Not seeing any additions for today's meeting. All in favor? Motion. A move by Councillor Paleshi, seconded by Councillor Vasante. Motion carries. Do any members have a declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda? Councillor Fortini, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to declare a conflict as my daughter works for bylaws on the salary portion. It comes to morning, Mr. Clerk, and we'll send in the request. Thank you.
The clerk will so note for the meeting minutes. This takes us to the consent portion. Committee is part of our consent motion process. I'll read each agenda item that is subject to the consent motion. Any member may verbally identify the item to be held for debate during the meeting. Any item not held for debate will be considered as part of the consent motion and voted on for approval. I'll start by reading the relevant agenda items. Members can identify any items to be held on debate. I don't think our budget's going to go by consent, but 8.1 staff report, Brampton Transit fare change. Hold. Staff report, recreation cost analyst for free older adult programming. Hold. Supplementary information 2020. Yes. We have to go through the process. Supplementary information 2023 proposed operating capital budgets. Hold. Public engagement handout. Hold. I have a motion moved by Councillor Keenan and seconded by Councillor Medeiros for the consent motion. No, we don't even need it. It's all held. Okay. Presentations. As we begin to formally consider the 2023-2025 budget, I'd like to ask Marlene Caladine, and our CAO, and Nash Damer, the Treasurer, Corporate Services, Support Services, please come forward, provide a presentation about the 2023-2025 budget and recommendations. After the presentation, committee can ask questions as we start to consider the budget. And before Marlene starts his presentation, I just want to thank all members of council. We've been having these tele-town halls and coffee chats and small business town halls. So we've had an immense level of public engagement leading up to today. So whether it's a small gathering like a coffee chat or a large town hall like we had on the weekend, we've really arranged for opportunity for residents to have their voice heard. And I want to thank every member of council for participating in that effort. Over to you, Marlon.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present the 2023 proposed operating and capital budgets. The budget theme for this year is Building a Foundation for the Future. It's a reflection of our commitment to address pressing needs while planning for the future. At this point, I'd like to thank Nash, our City Treasurer, all my colleagues, staff, for their diligence, dedication, and collaboration preparing this budget. It was great how the organization worked together to achieve this task, and we look forward to working with council to delivering it. I also like to point out that Brampton, over the past several years, have been awarded a AAA credit rating by S&P. This acknowledges our extraordinary commitment to sound fiscal management. Next slide. Coming out of the pandemic, next slide, please. Thank you. Coming out of the pandemic and dealing with changing legislations has made it clear that municipalities need to be resilient and agile. In building a foundation for the future, we must consider the following factors that are indicated on the slide before you. This includes taxpayers' affordability, fiscal sustainability, council's strategic priorities, and public input through community engagement. And the next slide will touch on our community engagement. further to our comments from the mayor just made. We're fortunate in Brampton to have a well-informed, engaged electorate. Throughout the year, we gathered feedback from various channels, such as 311, emails, social media, and in-person interactions. We got a better understanding of our citizen service expectations. The Have Your Say campaign give the public, sorry about that. The Have Your Say campaign give the public plenty of opportunity to participate in the planning and budgeting process. The campaign consisted of one business virtual roundtable that was attended by various sectors, 2 teletown halls that was attended by almost 14,000 people, and 6 ward coffee chats. What we learned is that the public sees the top 3 priorities for Brampton as healthcare, public safety, and low taxes. Although not in the top 3, there was also a strong consensus for the need to address climate change. On behalf of staff, I would like to thank the chair and vice chair of the Budget Committee and all members of council for their support and participation in these engagement opportunities. The next slide, please. Oh, next slide. Our budget process began in June of last year with an assessment of business needs and costing. This included comparing actual cost to budgets, reviewing multi-year plans, and revising departmental business plans. Staff then submitted their operating and capital budgets, prioritizing these services that will have greatest impacts. The Project Management Office played an instrumental role in helping departments assess their capital request against a set of criteria, such as unspent capital dollars and delivery capacity, applying stringent standards to future capital requests. After many rounds of review, revisions, reprioritization, we have a consolidated proposed corporate budget that we are tabling today. And next slide, please. So here are the numbers. We are proposing a budget of little over $1.3 billion, consisting of $844 million in operating budget. These are dollars spent to keep the city running efficiently, which includes salaries, maintenance contracts, office expenses, and reserves. There's also $492 million in capital investments for new acquisitions, new construction, and major repair or replacement of assets. This budget will allow us to keep providing much-needed services, keep assets in a state of good repair, and continue city building through investing in new facilities, equipment, and roads. This budget is fiscally responsible, and it will allow Brampton to continue to be a well-run city. Next slide, please. The 2023 proposed budget makes significant contributions to key infrastructure, such as Riverwalk, downtown revitalization, city facility maintenance, road resurfacing and improvements, and a contribution of $134 million to reserve. We're also putting healthcare and community safety front and center. This budget puts us closer to the goal of building a second hospital and a new cancer care center with a total local share contribution of $67.4 million to date. Our budget also ensures council-approved community safety action plan will be implemented, along with the continuation of Nurturing Neighborhoods program. We are bringing on 24 new firefighters, enhancing the city's fraud hotline, and investing in next generation 911. The city continues to make record investments in transit and bus refurbishments and Zoom service expansion. We're taking the lead to address climate change, including electrification of transit facilities, retrofitting of the Susan Fennell Community Center, and taking measures to increase the urban forest canopy. Our parks and recreational assets are well utilized and appreciated by everyone. The proposed budget supports key investments in Riverstone Community Center, youth hubs, Howden Recreation Center, and outfields at Gore Meadows. We are providing a wide range of programs, services, and infrastructure to meet the needs of our diverse and vibrant city. Next slide, please. Managing affordability while ensuring priorities was central to this budget. Staff worked hard to minimize increases to taxes and fees without losing sight of what investments are needed to achieve our strategic goals. Brampton's portion represents a little more than half of the proposed 5.7% increase. This is 1% below the estimated inflation rate of 6.7, which puts us below both the City of Mississauga at 5.8 and the City of Toronto at 7%. Brampton's population has grown by over 10% since last census. This budget proposal demonstrates careful stewardship of current resources with a sustainable plan to manage growth in the long term. I look forward to your feedback as we continue to review and discuss the budget. At this point, I would now like to pass it over to Nash for a more detailed presentation of the budget numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlon. Good afternoon, Mayor Brown and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to present the 2023 budget. I would like to start by thanking the CEO, the entire senior management team, as well as staff across the city and finance for the tremendous effort that went into preparing this budget. Thank you. Next slide, please. Before going into the 2023 budget, I just wanted to go back to where we finished 2022. And as you can see from the tables above, across all different residence type, Brampton is, after several years of tax freezes, is in the bottom half of property taxes for residence types. And that really positions us well for the current inflation pressure that is applied across municipalities as we work with a lower base than others in Canada, really. Next slide, please. So as provided by the CEO, the budget includes $1.33 billion of investments in Brampton in 2023. That's divided by $844 million operating budget and $492 million in capital budget. Starting first with operating and then moving on to capital, my next slides will be going into the detail and overview of the operating and the capital slides. Next slide, please. So as you can see, operating funding, property taxes remains the main input into funding our budget at 65%, which is an improvement of about 4% as compared to the start of the term, the previous term 4 years ago, which really has been made possible by increase in user fees and service charges, and mainly the stormwater charge. On the expenditure side, salary, wages, and benefits remain there, very steady around 60%, currently a little lower than 58%, but very steady at that rate. Contribution to reserves actually grew over the past 4 years from around 11% to 15.7%. Next slide, please. So looking at the increase from the 2022 budget, we see an overall growth of 7.5%, driven by growth in labor expenditures of 6.3%, combined with growth in other expenditures of 9.3%. This was met through three components. Revenues coming from increased user fees and other revenues at $18.1 million. Assessment growth at $4.5 million, which, as I will discuss next, has been a pressure that we have been dealing with for a few years now. And that puts the rest on property tax levy, which translates to the 2.9% increase on the tax bill for Brampton. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, as you can see from the graph on the assessment growth, over the past few years, assessment growth has been fairly low as compared to previous years. We had some expectations that it will actually improve in this year, but we believe, based on the information from our economic development team, but we believe that processing delays in MPAC are part of what has contributed to further extending this period. When talking to our economic development team, there is actually quite a bit of permits that have been issued, and we expect this to start rebounding in future years. However, currently it puts a pressure as it really covers very little of offsetting the expenditures in this year. Next slide, please. When trying to look at the components of the 2.9% increase, looking at the base operating growth and inflation, you can see that the team has worked really very diligently in containing as much as possible the impact of inflation on this budget. And this was intentionally done in order to make room for much needed new and enhanced services in transit, fire, community services, as well as to allow for continuing our additions to the special purpose levies in infrastructure and transit. The roundup of the remaining is the provincial impacts, which, as you can see, contributed an additional 0.2% of the overall increase. Next slide, please. Looking at the details of staff requests, we have a total increase of around 199, which is 192 full-time permanent staff, and on top of that, 2 temporary contracts and 5 part-time staff. Overall impact of this is close to 1.1% on the overall tax levy. And as you can see, some of the biggest investments that have been made in new staff are in transit at 99 staff, fire and emergency services at 32 staff, as well as community services at 20 new staff, as well as other departments, as you can see in the table. Next slide, please. Also, it's very important to understand that the tax bill in Brampton is made up of 3 major components. City of Brampton makes up around 40%, 40.4% of the overall bill. Region of Peel makes up about 36%, and school boards 23%. As you know, the City of Brampton's increase is 2.9 on that bill, 2.9%, and Region of Peel is 2.8, whereas the school board has been freezed for several years now without increases. Average residential tax bill is 5,621 on the average residential of 500 of a value of 542,000. It's important also to note and qualify that these are valuations and averages based on the CVA's current value assessments provided by MPAC, which haven't been updated since 2016. So they are overdue. They were supposed to be updated in 2020, but because of the pandemic, that hasn't happened yet, and we're still waiting for them to update it. So you will find that some of the average values for the houses and so on are way below what you would expect from current market valuations. We also added this year an average tax increase on the commercial properties, as well as the average increase on the industrial properties. The commercial is an increase of $648, and on the industrial, it's $2,269 on the tax bill for Brampton. Next slide, please. This is always a very interesting view for me. It really explains where the 40% portion of the tax bill, what does the city of Brampton deliver for it, how does it use it in order to deliver its main services for the city. So as you can see, almost a quarter of our income from property taxes goes into capital infrastructure funding. This is then followed by transit and fire and emergency services. Each make up about 20% of our overall property tax usage in order to support these services, followed by public works, recreation and culture, and parks and pathways, as you can see. Next slide, please. Moving on to capital, the 2023 capital funding is at $492 million this year. An interesting part of this is two major projects that I will talk about next. Electrification of the current and new transit facilities, which we have assumed funding from federal and provincial sources. Those projects are, of course, contingent on actual receiving of these funds, but we're very optimistic about securing those funds. So they make up around 50% of the overall capital portfolio for 2023. That's followed by tax-based capital contributions at 17%, development charges at 13%, and so on. Going next, and next slide, please. These are some of the key projects that have been included in the 2023 capital budget. As I mentioned, the first two projects, the facility electrification and transit facility, make up a big proportion of the overall capital portfolio, followed by bus purchases, Howden Recreation Center, and the zero carbon retrofit Susan Fennell Sportsplex. Riverwalk is at $20 million, and again, bus refurbishments at $16 million, and Zoom service expansion at $15 million. I won't go through the whole list, but I wanted to have it available for your reference. Next slide, please. Note please that the capital budget includes 3 years of details of the capital. It includes the current year that will be approved, as well as 2024 and 2025. One important note is that for capital budgets, contrary to operating, it is normal that there is some variation year to year in the value of the overall capital approved, and that depends on the actual projects and their size that are included in that year. Next slide, please. Wanted just to touch quickly on our contributions to reserves and the growth over the several years. As you can see, in 2019, at the start of the previous council term, we had an overall contribution to the infrastructure and transit levies at 68.1 million. Over the past 4 years, we have introduced as well stormwater charges at $24.4 million. We continue to grow our infrastructure and transit contributions, and last year we also added the hospital levy on top of that. So we're currently at 126 million specifically to those levies. This is a slide that that's from last year, but I wanted just to include as well this year. It really indicates where we stand with the other municipalities in terms of how much of our revenues is being contributed towards our capital. So we see that we are at 17%, which is just below Mississauga, Markham, but ahead of Vaughan, York Median, Hamilton, Richmond Hill, as well as others, which gives us comfort that we are within that reasonable affordability level of contributing to reserves, looking into the future, but still balancing it with the current affordability of this public. Next slide, please. The city's reserves, just very quickly, the city reserves are split into two main categories: obligatory reserves and discretionary reserves. Obligatory reserves, as you know, are reserves that we have limited control on. They were set up for specific purposes, and the amount that we collect and that how we use those reserves is very limited by municipal law. And then we have discretionary reserves, which are more in our own control. We decide how we'd like to use them, but we don't have a sustainable input into them. So there are one-time funding available there unless we consciously want to add to it. It remains as it is and will disappear as we use more of it. As part of the discretionary reserves, the GRS account is considered a discretionary reserve. We had it since 2004. It's set at 10% of our operating budget, and currently it includes some funding that was provided through COVID, but beyond that, we're currently a little shy of our target there. Next slide, please. Yeah, and just overall in terms of numbers, these are the net balances, so gross balances netted of all commitments against them. We continue to hover around the $600 million. These include both the obligatory and the discretionary reserves, and we continue to be within that range, so it's a steady operation as we see it. Next slide, please. We have no additional debt planned for 2023, and no additional debt repayments that are planned for 2023. Just a reminder that our policy is to match the debt repayments with the actual debt issuance that happen in correspondence to the project that will use it. And we don't expect that we will have that in 2023. And hence, no changes in the repayment plans. Next slide, please. Just as we near to the close, just wanted to touch very, very highly on Bill 23 and the long-term financial master plan. As we know, Council has put a very high priority on sizing up, understanding, and putting the right advocacy for the Bill 23 impacts to the city. As of current, the DC bylaw still remains in effect for this year. We will be doing a DC study this year that will change it into the future year. We're working very closely with the rest of the management team to understand the impacts and how that will be built into the financial master plan, long-term financial master plan going forward. Actually, part of the delay in the financial master plan is that we wanted to make sure that Bill 23 is reflected in that. Next slide, please. And before closing, just wanted really to share with Council proudly, we have been the recipient of several awards that recognize finance excellence in budget preparation and presentation, the financial reporting at the city, as well as a AAA credit rating that we have maintained since 2006. This is the highest credit rating that is possible, and we're very proud to receive that. Also, good news, wanted to share that we received the latest Distinguished Budget Presentation Award on Friday last week, so another year to be added to our history there. Next slide, please. Thank you. So closing with the overall impact here, we're proud to present this, what we believe is a very well balanced, a well thought out budget to Council, and we look forward to your feedback and to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marlon and Nash, for that detailed presentation. And I would note, despite the fact that this is an increase, I know the increase is a challenge for every family or small business or anyone on a fixed income. This is the lowest in the region if you compare it to Mississauga or Toronto. And so I know it's a difficult year, but I think you've put a lot of work into this, and it's a very thoughtful presentation. So thank you for that. Are there questions for Marlon or Nash? Let's get my screen back. Councillor Fortini.
Peter, can we put slide 17 on, please? Mind, or is it Nash? So Nash, I think, so we look at this, who determines the property tax? Last year, we had 45% come to the city. Now we're getting 40. The school board was 18, and they're at 23. How is that divided? So we're losing 5% compared to last year.
So the split is not predetermined, Councillor, through the chair. The split is not predetermined for us. The split comes out of each of the municipalities putting their budget out and saying that this is the amount that is needed from property taxes in order for us to meet our budget. After this comes out, they get added to each other, and that produces how much of the overall requirement goes to the city, to the region, and to the board.
Okay, so we go to the school board, they do 0, 0, 0, 0 shows. But meanwhile, from 18%, they went to 23%. So if they're doing it 0, how come they got 5% extra? That's, that 5% should stay with us and say, we need a tax increase on the school board, not just put the blame on the region and on the city, and they always have a nice 0.
So again, Councillor, there is no predefined pot of the funding that gets distributed. Every year, each of the municipalities states their needs, and then that makes the new overall part and how it's divided. So it's not really, we don't lose anything. We only get our needs that we ask for as part of the tax bill every year.
Yeah. And when we send a tax bill, it shows what we charge, what the region charge, or what the school board charges.
Absolutely.
So the residents of Rio say, oh, the school board did zero again. Right?
And
So-
that's a little,
So-
that's a little untrue because the way that the school board works very differently than the region and the local city. The school board, all we do here, we are just a collection point
Yeah.
for part of the funding for the education at the provincial level. So this does not actually mean that this is what goes into, for example, the Peel Educational Board. This just goes to the province, and then they decide on all the education taxes that were collected. They decide how that gets allocated to the different regions.
Okay, wish the residents would know that. The other thing is, I've seen Howden Recreation Center here. I don't see Chris Gibson and Victoria Park on our budget, which we thought is gonna be done. And the other thing is, why are we already buying furniture for these places when they're not built in our budget? We already estimated millions of dollars, well, $500,000, 700 for furniture, which we haven't even built them yet.
So, Councillor, we'll have to go back and get the answer to that
Okay.
for the details, if you don't mind.
Okay, and, okay, anyway, I'll wait for tomorrow, I got lots of questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fortini. Councillor Palashi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nash, of the 9.8 cents per capital infrastructure funding, how much of that money goes into the reserves? And how much of the 9.8 of that is covered by development charges?
Councillor, through the chair, this does not include the development charges contributions to that. This shows how much of the property taxes revenue is actually dedicated to contribute to those reserves. And so we're talking about the total amount here going into the reserves.
That, the capital infrastructure funding is a total amount going into reserves? It's 9.8 cents on the dollar is going into reserves for capital infrastructure funding.
Yes, on the overall tax bill.
Okay. I'll be asking, and maybe I'll just highlight it now, but I'll be asking for a breakdown of the 24 million in the stormwater charge. How much of that breakdown is residential and how much is non-res? And if we wait till Public Works and Engineering to answer that, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to throw that out there. Additionally, I was going to ask each department, but I'll start by just asking the number of new hires. How many of those new hires are from the 2022 budget that have yet to be filled? I'd also like to know that across each department. And I think those are my beginning questions. Thank you.
Councillor.
Okay, Councillor Medeiros.
Thank you for you, Chair, and thank you to the Chair and Vice Chair for all the work you guys did on this budget, and thank you to staff. You know, certainly this is yeoman's work, and it's a lot of detail, so thank you. I guess from when we were looking at that slide about the different themes, and you know, when I take a step back, having the fortune of serving on council since 2014, the one thing that resonates with me today is implementation. So I'm not going to nitpick at positions that we're adding, and I know we're going to go through department. And I want to thank the CAO because you did bring that report, I think, before Christmas about how we're going to implement some of those projects that we're behind. So what I kind of want a surety, right? What I'm hoping an overall sort of, as we go on for the next 3-4 years, And my frustration lies a little bit with also the private sector where we talk about all the applications that come in, but you drive around the city and you don't see cranes. So I guess my question or my sort of what I would hope to hear from you, because, and again, what resonates, a couple of years ago, we implemented a project management office, or we added all these positions because, there was all these gray areas between project and implementation. And here we are, new term of council. So what assurities are we going to see in this year, for example? Does this budget give you the confidence that, I don't need numbers, but we're going to see shovels in the ground? Are we going to see implementation of our initiatives? Are we going to follow and track? Because, and I do know a lot of these initiatives are dependent on other partners. So we have money earmarked, but some of these initiatives require people to sort of jump in. So I'm putting those, parking that on the side. But I would hope that when you're looking at all those positions we're adding, I would assume and I would hope that management, if this is not helping me implement our deliverables that we said we are, how business critical are these positions? Especially if could be wrong, but we're, 56% of our overall budget is towards wages and salary? Yeah, so I'm just hoping, and I don't need feedback, but just, a very simplified, sort of Cole's notes. When I leave here and I speak to a resident, this approval of budget, we're going to be implementing, we're breaking ground. Is that fair to say on some of these initiatives?
Through the chair to Councilor Medeiros, that's a very good question, and I touched on it briefly in my presentation. The EPMO office played a big role in this year's budget. In fact, we spent a lot of time with our staff to make sure that all new requests that are coming forward are going to be resource managed. In other words, if you can implement it, don't put it in the budget. That's number one. Also moving forward, we're moving to a new process in which we're going to be asking for design money first. So it's design, it's costed, then we're going to come back and get approval for construction, so we don't have the big cost escalation as well. And we also have a process in which we're going to go through and clean up that backlog that we have there now.
No, and through you, Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Chair, thank you very much. And I know, again, there's a lot of moving parts, notwithstanding COVID and everything else. So notwithstanding the color commentary, I just hope next year when we're talking about the budget that we do have shovels in the ground, we're implementing, and I really, I like that assurity, CEO, that you're challenging upper management to sort of only come back with resources that are helping, implement stuff. Because we heard, Councilor Fortini, I talk about those rec centers for the last 3-4 years, and we heard from staff saying, council, yeah, we're designing it. Oh yeah, we're about to do it. Oh, and nothing, and here we are today just looking at each other going, what's going on, right? So it's great that from that broad theme. I guess the last, when you're looking at that 56%, and again, I'm not expecting us to do a comparison with other municipalities, but is there sort of a recognized sort of industry number in terms of ratio where you want to be as a municipality? So 56% of our, because residents will that's always sort of a sticker shock for folks. When you think of all the money we collect, 56% is already allocated, and it's just goes toward wages. So then, not getting to the discussion on wage suppression and what do we do, how are we going to control costs? The one assurity I would hope as well, because we heard this and I saw this last couple of years, that we had directors and management positions with no really people reporting to them. And I hope that we've gone through this exercise by department, and we're looking at all the redundancies and ensuring that there's not management positions out there that don't have a certain number of people reporting to them. Is that safe to say that we're going through that exercise?
Through the chair, that is correct. It's actually still ongoing.
It's still ongoing. Okay. Well, that's great. But I look forward to the divisional presentations, and I thank you to staff and everyone for all the work. Thank you.
Councillor Singh, who is online.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. And I just wanted to go to the slide with the comparisons between other municipalities. It was at the beginning. Yeah, right there, number 10. Yeah, and I just want to say what a difference from when we started earlier on. I remember Brampton used to be much higher. Do you know, Nash? Were we in the top one or two or three in 2018 when we started?
Counselor, I don't think they're ranked by percentage and so on, but as you said, it really shows a difference on where we ranked at the beginning and where, like, after 4 years, where we're currently ranking in terms of just where we are on these tables.
Yeah, no, and I do have questions for departments. I'll leave this for the departments, but this slide really caught my attention, and I think it's a good news story in the budget for sure. And I'll be sharing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councillor Santos is next.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair, and I also appreciate the comment that Councillor Singh had brought up. This is good news for us. And just in further sort of comment to some of the concerns at the table with respect to shovels in the ground, et cetera, from last term. Appreciate all the work that's put into this budget and looking forward to the very specific presentations. But last term and the past few years have been a very difficult few years to budget accordingly and to put shovels in the ground because of the unprecedented pandemic and COVID-19 and all the delays related to construction and supply chain issues, et cetera. But also because there was a lot of turnover in the city of Brampton. And with a lot of turnover and with some levels of issues in the previous term, that's going to obviously delay some things as well. And so now we're into this new term, and I'm confident with Marlon and our staff here at the City of Brampton that we're going to be able to see things through and get things done in this new term. So looking forward to the presentations. And again, as Councillor Singh had shared, this is good news in front of us in the screen, on the screen right now. Thank you.
Okay. No other questions? So I have a motion moved by Councillor Santos, seconded by Councillor Tour to receive the presentation. All those in favor? Motion carries. Our next item is 5.2, departmental presentations regarding the 2023-2025 capital and operating budgets as proposed. We have several presentations from our departments regarding the budget submission. Committee, after each department presentation, will have an opportunity for questions and consider the respective department budget recommendations, as well as consider any related reports before the Budget Committee. For those department presentations we do not get to today, they will be continued at our future sessions, either this evening or Tuesday, February 28th. So welcome, and Peter, is the order still transit first? So it'll be transit first, followed by fire and emergency services, public works, community services, corporate support services, planning, building, growth management, legislative services, and office of the CEO. So starting with transit.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And we'll be covering, of course, the transit presentation for the 2023 budget. Just want to acknowledge everyone who's joined us in chambers and online, but I want to also acknowledge our union president ATU, Andrew Salaby, and Amandeep Gill, the secretary of the ATU, and also Mandeep too. So welcome and thank you for joining us today in the chambers. Through this whole budget process, I'm going to be touching on the COVID impacts, some of the recoveries, what's happened over the past 3 years. I think it's important to note that we are currently at a $184 million operating budget with a net of about $84 million after revenues and accounting for all our provincial gas tax, et cetera, that we incorporate in our operating budgets. The increase that's before you today is at $207 million in the operating budget and a net of $92 million. And I'll talk all the nuances that contribute to that. If you acknowledge back in 2019 when we put forward the 2020 budget, we included things like the free seniors pass. We included the extension of the 505. These were all deferred during COVID because of a significant drop in ridership. And we brought back to council all those deferrals, and we have implemented those already and made a commitment to keep that in the previous term of council. The actual overview, and if I can get this to work here, did I do this right? Yeah. There are three predominantly sections within within transit, the operations, the services, and the development side. We are experiencing a huge growth in ridership in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area above pretty well everyone in North America. A very unique thing, and I want to make sure that we make note of this, everyone in the GTHA is between 60 and 80% of recovery in ridership pre-pandemic numbers. When you look at across Canada, they're all pretty well the same. You know, Brampton is experiencing to date 115% pre-pandemic numbers. So when you look at those numbers and the service pressures we have on and the service increases, we have what we feel is a very balanced approach in terms of how we're addressing the demand within our community. We're putting forward 84,800 service hours to implement for 2023, and there was deferrals that I'll talk about through the presentation that we had during the COVID years. I was going to say next slide, but I got to do this here. Here we are. Okay. So, the budget goals that we have for 2023 are all around the increase in frequencies to meet some of the growth. All the programs that we have through the external funding sources, such as State of Good Repair, the electrification program, which, as you know, is approximately $1.5 billion in total, and I'll talk a bit more about that as we get through the capital parts, and increasing and enhancing our Zoom services in higher order corridors. And those studies will be ongoing as we move forward. And just to touch on the the COVID recovery part, this graph depicts our peers in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. The ones that are not on there is because they don't have their data, but we confirm there are within the 60 to 80% range. And as you can see, Brampton is certainly the front runner in terms of the recovery from the pandemic. And that continues to be the trend. In fact, I had a staff report on the January numbers. In January, compared to January of 2019, keeping in mind that COVID hasn't hit in 2019 in January, is 127%. So, you know, the numbers are off the charts, and one side is really good that those numbers are growing like crazy, but the other side is the challenges of meeting that demand. This slide here shows the ridership growth over the past decade, a little bit more than a decade. As you can see, it was a continued growth in ridership. And then when the pandemic hit us in March of 2020, there was significant drops in ridership. We were down, to below 20% of ridership. And that continued for a period of time, and then we slowly seen a continued increase to the point where we are today. And today we're anticipating over 35 million riders in 2023. To summarize this, I'll just spend a little bit of time on this slide. When you look at the service and fare changes back in 2020 during COVID, Council approved in 2019 the 2020 budget. The 2020 budget did include service hours to implement as part of our growth for 2020. However, because in Q1 COVID hit us in 2020, we went back to Council requesting that we defer the services because our ridership dropped to 20%. There's no need to put in extra services when your ridership is struggling during COVID. We also deferred, at that time is important to note, a council-approved fare change from 2019, that was approved in 2019 for the 2020 budget. And that's for the service hours that we were going to implement in 2020. I want to make note of that because it's going to impact in terms of the fare changes that we're proposing here in this budget. In 2021, we continued, because of COVID continued, we went back to council, deferring our increase of services and not asking for anything else in 2021 budget, and as well as when we went to 2022. What we did do in 2022 as we slowly came out of the pandemic is implemented the services that was approved by council back in 2019 as part of the 2020 budget process. I'm jumping around in years, I hope I'm not complicating it. And also, during that 3-year period, there have been no fare increases. We did implement the free seniors for residents in Brampton, which was a huge success for the residents that were seniors in our city. So a lot of the budget drivers for 2023 are around the third facility, which you're familiar with, and this is contingent, and I can't stress it enough, but I'll talk a bit more as we go through the capital budget, is the requirement for funding from the federal and provincial governments for this initiative. State of Good Repair to replace our vehicles and our shelters, and also the growth that we're seeing through the 5-year business plans that we are, and that's the growth of Zoom along Chinguacousy and other corridors that we're doing studies on. And if you're part of the council workshop this morning on transit, we touched on the 5-year business plan as well. So 2023 operating highlights are primarily around the service increases. There's 84,800 hours that we're proposing to increase in 2023, and that's a bit of a combination of Zoom service as well as our conventional services. The 2020 budget approved that we had back in 2019, 2/3 of those services have been implemented already, and we continue to ramp up and finish up the service hours that were approved back then. The actual planned service growth for 2021 and 2022 that are part of the business plan were not implemented. And again, that's important to note as well. And for those of you who've seen our budgets in the past, many, many years ago, we used to implement between 75,000 and 150,000 service hours in 1 year, depending on the growth through the past decade. The other big factor in our operating budget, which was a huge factor, probably the biggest, is the fuel increases, the fuel fluctuation. And that's something that is very important to note. As you know, back in the time where we were paying 85 cents a liter for diesel compared to what we are paying today, substantially more. And in the whole budgeting of fuel this year, the cities, took a balanced approach to long-term sustainability with affordability of the taxpayers. This is extremely important to note. To do so, budgets are set on keeping an eye on the longer-term view and of fuel prices rather than overreacting to short-term fluctuations and the volatility in the market. The war in Ukraine and other factors have influenced our fuel increases. Working with our finance team and our CLT team, we're doing a blended smoothing of the budget over the next 3 years, and that will gradually take us up to what the actual fuel cost should be that we're anticipating. And that's important to note because we are budgeting here for $1.06 a liter, and that's part of the smoothing process rather than going to where we are because the budget will be tremendously higher for that. So we don't want to react to volatility right now. We want to do what's stable. And important to note too, our recent fuel prices that we saw in the past 2 or 3 weeks, I can't remember, is $1.34 a liter. And that's what we predicted in our CIB modeling of consultant work of what that price would be for this year. So again, that smoothing makes sense, and we're going to get to what the what our projections were in 3 years' time, but smoothing it out through that time. The other parts are the collective agreement that are directly impacting our 2023 operating budget, a 2% increase, and this is the 4th year of a 5-year deal with the Amalgamated Transit Union. And through the process in finding that balanced approach, we are proposing in our budget a 10% fare increase. 10% is high if you do it in 1 year, but when you look at what we increased in 2020 budget, that we actually implemented the majority of those services, and we did not increase the fare, plus the increases that we're proposing in this year, we feel this is an appropriate balance to finding sustainability within providing our services. In the same period of the last 3 years, you have approximately, I believe it's 12% on the CPI, so we're well within that area of increases. However, in saying that, we probably will be on the higher side compared to our peers, but I will say that we're the only ones that are producing more services because of demand. So again, we're trying to find that balance when we're looking at our fare increases. And that doesn't include, of course, the senior residents that have free fares. Obviously, their increase will be 10%, but 10% of free is free. So highlighting, I know my colleagues are shaking their heads at me, but highlighting the impacts, as I mentioned, the fuel rate adjustments, the collective agreement adjustments, the Presto commissions of $500,000, the vehicle repair and maintenance increases that came from, again, the higher cost of parts, the higher cost of maintaining our vehicles based on what's happening around the world. The other impacts that are in front of you there are the new services that we're implementing of 84,000 hours. The increase in provincial gas tax that we're getting helps offset the cost, and the increase in fare revenues that we're looking at acquiring. So the overall budget for the operating in 2023 for transit is $207 million. And again, they're offset by our revenues where there'll be a net operating budget of $92 million, an increase from $88 million. On the capital side, we have a bunch of capital programs that we're in the midst of implementing and advocating for in terms of the electrification program. The one that you're all aware of is the third facility electrification. You know, we have ISIP funding to build a third facility as part of our growth. We are trying to electrify that facility with a perfect opportunity of building a new state-of-the-art facility, having it fully capable of housing electric vehicles. That's a $150 million ask that we're asking the federal and provincial governments to fund. We have gained a lot of traction from the federal government and some substantial interest from the provincial government that we're still working on with the hopes that we'll be able to have some good news in a very near future. Also $60 million to retrofit our Sandwood facility. As Ivana Thomas provided in our presentation this morning on a workshop, we're adding on 10 more electric vehicles this year, adding already to the 8 that we have. But to go further, we need some infrastructure to support the charging. And by retrofitting our Sandalwood facility will allow us to expand our electrification program quicker. So that's another thing that we're working with the province and the federal government to fund. It's important to note, and I'll know whether it's a motion that has to be brought forward to the budget process, but I'll work with the treasurer, and we've had this discussion in terms of making it very clear that the $150 million to $60 million, $210 million total, that are in our budget are subject, contingent on federal and provincial funding, and that's extremely important to note. The other ones are the replacement vehicles that we have, and $30 million. We're looking at 38 replacement vehicles for the program. And then, of course, the enhanced regional connections of implementing the Chinguacousy Zoom service in 2024 that aligns with the commissioning of the McCallion Line LRT. And then again, the planning studies that we're going forward with some of our other capital programs. State of good repair throughout 2023 to 2025 also include bus refurbishments of $43 million, 80 buses for replacement. This is not for 20, this is overall through the next 3 years. And increasing fleet to meet our future demand of 105 growth vehicles valued at $148 million. These are budgeted with what we deal with today with provincial, federal, and municipal contributions to our buses. During the electrification program, as you know, we have a Canada Infrastructure Bank loan that we'll be able to tap into to offset the increased cost of diesel or hybrid vehicles into fully electrified vehicles. The other regional connections that we're looking at is Zoom along Bramalea, the continuation of the implementation of the LRT from Steeles down to Port Credit, and again, the other higher order transit systems that we're looking at, including the Mayfield West Transit Hub in terms of the studies that we need to do. They're not in the 2023 budget, but they're in, I believe, 2024 or 2025. So that's the capital summary there. There's $275, almost $276 million worth of capital programming in transit for 2023. Keeping in mind, though, that the bulk of it is federal and provincial. $230 million of that is federal and provincial. Then we also have development and also other funding available with the municipal contribution. I think is about $25 million, if I'm not mistaken, $24.6 million. So the transit priorities, I believe this is the last slide, is again the third facility, the electrification program, and how do we tap into the ZETF program federally, which is the Zero Emission Transit Fund, and that actually incorporates that $1.5 billion in totality with the CIB, with what we have approved today, plus what we're asking for to fully electrify, and we continue the advocacy for those funding. Other parts, again, of the LRT extension, and we covered some of that information this morning. The Queen Street BRT that we're working with Metrolinx on, and that continues to advance through the EA process, and we're hoping to hear some good news on funding on that front. And of course, a 7-day, all-day, two-way go that we know has been a priority for our council for many years, and we've been advocating on that front as well. And that concludes the transit presentation.
On the board, we have Councilor Medeiros first.
Thank you for you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Alex, and certainly this department, victim of your own success almost in all the work that you're doing. I guess the last slide, when you talked about the regional connectivity and the regional, so we have sort of BRT, we have LRT and so on. With the system that's already under pressure, and it was great to hear the transit fare, the 10%, and you guys include the CPI to ensure that there's affordability there. So it's not just because, you know, you would assume to try to reduce the demand is almost, you gotta, you know, it's, you want to look at a price correlation and 10%, but considering the CPI. But with the regional connectivity improving, that's even going to put more pressure on this. Do you have sort of ideas, or there already modeling out there that sort of tells us, you know, in 5 years with LRT, this is what we expect in pressure, all-way two-way GO service. And then after notwithstanding, and maybe you might have a comment, is the integration of active transportation. Because I know that there was talk or push that even sort of our bus stops, and I hear from the community, putting it more sort of integrated where we have active transportation. So moving forward, certainly, if you're already dealing with a lot of pressures, you know, the future really looks at some challenges that you have regarding this area.
Absolutely, and through the chair, Councilor Medeiros, you hit it right on. I mean, when you're looking at the regional pressures that are put on us in terms of increasing transit, all-day two-way GO, other BRT systems that are surrounding us, it just puts more pressure on us because the demand for ridership will increase even more than, so we factor in all our modeling of what that looks like through the years, including all-day two-way GO. And I know in talking to colleague Phil Verster in Metrolinx, even some of their programs that they recognize when they want to deliver it may be compromised a little bit in time because of the economic times and because of COVID impacts. So we're keeping in lockstep with what we feel is a balanced approach for our community, given that when the LRT expansion or the commissioning takes place in 2024, what are the impacts to our conventional services leading up from Steeles, for example, into downtown? And then even more so, if we take the LRT line from Steeles all the way up to downtown with two-way GO, with the Queen Street, there's a lot of local impacts. So that is all part of our modeling, and we factor in that into our 5-year business plan, and it gives us the roadmap with all the inputs. Your point to active transportation, we work very closely with our colleagues, and I know Henrik's here as well, in our transportation achievements for active transport, how they integrate with transit and where those pressures are and how do we factor in. So they are all part of our business plan and will be brought forward at the right opportunities for budget presentation. But these are all pressures that, you know, all these initiatives are great, but there's also some pressures locally that we have to meet as well. So they're all factored in.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Next up is Councillor Pellecci.
Thanks, Alex. Alex, I'd like to know how much you spend on communications and how much you spend on engagement for transit, because I know transit takes on a lot of their own messaging and stuff, which it's probably better served, but I'd like to get an understanding of, in the budget, how much is spent on those two items, engagement and then communications. I'd also like to know how much is spent on towing. I'm sure we have an RFP for one company or maybe multiple, so I'd like to know what that is. I'd like to know how much we spend on outside maintenance. I'd also like to know if we've changed the level of service for cleaning the buses. I know that staff did a fantastic job, and council and you basically said that we need to do better during COVID. So are we still maintaining that level, or are we reducing that level because of the receding COVID cases? I'd like to know are we still part of the buying group for fuel? We are? Okay, and I'd like to know if that's still going well. I'd like to know what the largest ridership route is as well in the city.
I think just the second one, you mentioned how much we spend on outreach and marketing. What was the second one? Sorry, I missed that before you went to the outsourcing of...
engagement, or?
Not the engagement after that.
Towing?
Towing, that's what it was, thank you. So I'll start off with the outreach and engagement. I don't have the exact numbers with me. I'm sure one of our staff would pull it up if you want to answer it now, but we'd probably be able to get that to you later if that works for you.
Absolutely.
And through the chair to Councillor Pellecci, the outreach programs, we have a limited amount of staff that we do where we go out to schools, we go out to the community, newcomer tours, and it's a lot of outreach programs that we do. We do work closely with our colleagues in Stratcom, and I know Jason Tamming's group supports us a lot with some of the graphics, some of the other materials that we use to post and publish to so it's a bit of a hybrid blend in terms of how we operate to try to gain the efficiencies of what we have internal transit versus what we have with our comms folks. I know the comms folks are stretched because of the demands that they have in their group, so we always have that regular dialogue on finding that balance in terms of what do we need at transit versus what do we need at comms to make sure that our outreach is met and our marketing is met. So that'll continue, but I'll have to get the exact numbers that are in transit for that.
For sure.
For advertising, et cetera. The towing is a procurement process. We go through a fair and competitive process. I believe we have one, if I'm not mistaken, but if we have more in case it gets busy, we do that. But that's through a fair, a fair competitive process, and we get the best price on the towing, and that's what we do. And we can provide you that if you'd like in terms of the information or a budget on that.
What I'm looking at for that particular one is at what point do we say, maybe we should buy our own tow truck? That's what I'm kind of looking for. So if we can provide the same, like if we can provide a full-time, person, how often are we having, buses pulled in? How much money are we actually spending on a year-to-date on towing service?
So
that's kind of what I'm looking at.
Through the chair, that's a very good point. We always do an internal business case analysis because, as you know, in our industry, we're always compared to our colleagues across Canada in terms of how efficient we run. So the last time we did that analysis, it still made sense to contract that out. For many reasons, there's liability reasons, there's damage, and then the actual equipment costs and everything. So there is a threshold. The more vehicles that break down, the more towing we do, there might be a threshold where it'll tip towards having internal. If you recall, years and years ago, we did our snow clearing for not for transit stops, because that's done through our public works folks and contracting out, but our terminals, our facilities, we used to do the in-house cleaning. We went to a model where it went through public works with a certain level of service required, especially when you get snow at our terminals and customers are on there. You need to have that terminal cleaned very quickly if it's 2 or 3 in the morning. Over a couple of years, and that was back, if you remember Joe Patushka, the two of us talked about it. It didn't work. In fact, we were paying more. So we brought it back into transit. We always do the analysis every couple of years to challenge ourselves to make sure how can we do it more efficiently. And we ended up bringing it back in. It was more efficient. It cost us less and our service standards were higher. So we're always reviewing that. We'll continue reviewing that for our towing as well. The outsourcing for repairs, that continues through a fair and competitive procurement process. It's a balance of how much do we do in-house versus how much do we do outsourced. It's about how many mechanics you have per vehicles, and in the industry you have kind of a norm of how many you should have. What are the facility requirements? What are the warranties even? So if we have, for example, an engine rebuild done internally, and it'll be done competently and thoroughly, but occasionally when you have a malfunction of a part inside that you replaced, the warranty of the part might be, but the labor resides on us, and we have to pull it back out and do it back in, where if it's a vendor, that's their problem under a warranty. We always do an analysis on that too, to see how efficient it is, and we work with our union as well in order to find that proper balance to remain competitive within our industry, and that's always a balance that we try to achieve. The other one is about fuel. And if I missed one in between, the cleaning, I'm sorry, I'll go back to the cleaning.
Cleaning bus.
Yeah, so cleaning, we have standards that we do for washing and fueling our buses every day. Then we have detailing of buses, and those haven't changed since many, many years. If anything, they've increased. During COVID, though, we did do a 24-hour sanitization. That we scaled back on. We still do cleaning, but we don't do...
We scaled that back.
Yes, because we don't do a sanitization every 24 hours. That came at a significant pressure on resources as well as finances. However, safety of our customers, safety of our staff were the key components in doing that at the time. And also, we were fortunate enough to have Safe Restart funding to help offset some of those costs. But in the industry, everyone scaled back on that because of the coming out of COVID, and those 24-hour sanitizations do not happen anymore. The last part I think you asked is about fuel, and if I miss one through the chair, Councilor Pelletier, maybe you have to remind me. The fuel, we continue some time ago, we leveraged, instead of going out with the region or going out alone, we leverage opportunities with Toronto. They have TTC and others that buy a huge bulk, and we were able to piggyback onto their contracts. Consumer of about 18 million liters a year, if I'm not mistaken, for transit in Brampton. We were able to leverage a better price points by doing that contract and piggyback onto Toronto's. And that we'll continue to do, and when that comes up, we'll be reviewing all our options at that time to keep, to maintain the best fuel price we can.
That's the one with Toronto and the province still. Metrolinx is involved in that one too.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I don't believe that's the Metrolinx. We were involved with Metrolinx a long time ago, but when we went out last time, we believed that Toronto was a better opportunity to get price points because of the demands that they had. And I'm going to look over, I don't know if Vince, there you are. Vince, go ahead.
So we used to purchase fuel with Metrolinx and with MyWay. And when we went to adding biofuel to our buses in the winter, in the summer, so we were trying to make our vehicles more environmentally friendly. That's exactly what MyWay did. But Metrolinx backed out of the agreement because they do not use biofuel in their engines. We'll use it on their buses, but they don't put it in their locomotives, the rail locomotives. Because of that, we couldn't go into an option with them. So us, City of Mississauga, got in the same contract as the TTC and City of Toronto. So they bought, TTC and City of Toronto buy about 100 million liters. We buy 18 to 20 as a city. Mississauga is reasonably close to us, so we got their buying power. What we ended up doing by going with TTC and the City of Toronto instead of with Metrolinx, we saved 2.5 cents a liter for the duration of the contract. So the fuel you buy on a day-to-day basis, you don't really save much. It depends on what bench you buy from. So we buy with the exact same buying power as the City of Toronto has. Mm-hmm. But because of that buying power, we saved on some distribution, and it may cost 2.5 cents. And that contract's here for at least, I think, another year or two. And when it's done, we will look at trying to re-up with them. I think it's always going to be beneficial to re-up with our peers. If that's Metrolinx, great. If that's the City of Toronto and Mississauga, we'll do it with them.
Thanks, Vince.
So thank you. Sorry.
The ridership route.
Yes. So just to get back, thanks, Vince, for that. Through the chair to Councillor Pellecci. The actual towing we have in 2022 was $300,000, and that covered all our towing that we had, and that included breakdowns and other stuff that we had to do.
Sorry, that include breakdowns?
Like breakdowns and pulling vehicles out when they have to be pulled out of somewhere. Even if they're caught in the snow, sometimes we get our maintenance department, but sometimes we rely on the towers as well to help us.
Yeah, so that's just the tow?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And then the other point about the consulting work that we do for outreach and marketing, we have a $100,000 budget internally. I know we do work with our Stratcom and reviewing some of that to maybe shift things around a bit, but this is something that'll be ongoing between the two departments and how we support each other.
That's communications?
That's communications, yeah.
Okay, so I'm still waiting on the engagement piece? That's separated, right?
They're all part of the same under the professional consulting. So engagement, like I mentioned, we have internal staff and we rely on Stratcom to help us out when we need more staff to hit our platforms for new services when we implement them, to get our communication, printed materials, all that kind of stuff is all part of that.
Okay.
And the last point was the route. Our busiest corridor in Brampton has always been Queen Street. We have over 30,000 boardings there a day. If you drill it down to the route level, it's the 501, the Zoom service that we have along Queen Street. That is our busiest corridor. I think the next to that, I'll have to look at my colleague Doug, is probably Steeles, the 511, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Doug's shaking his head. So Queen Street is our busiest route, the 501 is our busiest route.
Okay. And I figured that, I just wasn't sure. And sorry, the ongoing question for each department will be, how many of your new hires were the same hires as 2022? So how many of your new ones were included in 2022 that you have yet to fill and that you've re-added into 2023?
We fill them. 2022, we had only two. Don't forget, because of the pandemic, we weren't asking for anything in the last several years. We only had two. There were two operators because of our increases in vacation allotment. They were hired pretty well immediately. In previous years, the increase have always been operators only. But there's no vacancies that we have today that were approved in the 2022 budget that we have in 2023. 2023 is a completely new ask, and if and when we get approvals to that, we'll start having a plan on how we can onboard these folks. Because of the delays in the budget process, because of the municipal elections, we have to start the gates running to onboard, train new drivers, and how do we get up to the complement to put out the services that we need. So hope I answered your question. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pleshy. I don't see any other questions, so thank you, Alex, for the transit presentation. We have a motion moved by Councillor Singh, seconded by Councillor Fertini. All those in favor? Motion carries.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just for committee's confirmation as we get started, are we going to just be receiving the presentations or approving the 2023 and 2023 operating and capital budgets and 2024, 2025 capital budgets in principle at the time of presentation?
It's just receipt for now, in case there's any, on the final night, if there are additional changes.
Okay.
Okay, our next item is Fire and Emergency Services. Over to Chief Boyes.
Good afternoon through the chair, members of committee. Pleased to present this year's 2023 budget. I will acknowledge our union president. I think he's here in the crowd. He is not here in the crowd today, so he's probably listening intently online. So next slide, please. Our team, we work to keep the city safe each day through a wide range of preventative and educational services. And we have 13 fire stations, soon to open 14 this year. Our team is over 550 staff across 8 different divisions, as you can see laid out here. Our department's 6 goals aim to provide exceptional emergency education and prevention services while striving to be fiscally efficient, environmentally sustainable, and community focused. We also work to promote a culture that embraces empowerment, wellness, and diversity and inclusion. Our overarching goal is to be progressive public safety leaders. Our budget drivers remain relatively constant year over year. Our primary cost is associated with the 2019 to 2023 collective agreement, which is in its final year this year. We're also facing the inflationary impact of increasing costs of goods and services through the goods and services that we purchase, one of those being fuel. We have a sustained focus this year on prevention and education-related activities. 2022 was a tragic year in the city of Brampton for fire deaths, where we lost 10 residents. So we are really going to be increasing our focus on that to try to reduce the likelihood of any other fire deaths in the city. We also need to maintain our trucks and our equipment, our apparatus, while striving to meet the new training and certification legislation that's put out by the province without any additional funding for the municipality. I'm just going to go ahead one slide here. Our total operating expenditures are $91.9 million, with 98% funded through property taxes. So labor costs account for 93% of our expenditures, with the remaining 7% distributed across repairs and maintenance, office and administrative, and then other, which is things like heating, fuel, and hydro. Our total variance this year is 5.7%, which does include the 32 new frontline positions that are outlined in the budget binder. Our 2023 operating highlights do include our compensation rates, which are in accordance with the last year of our collective agreement. We're also, similar to the other departments, facing inflationary cost pressures on things like fuel, which we see about $160,000 increase, and other costs on things like water and sewer. We will be adding 4 new staff proposed here for a residential and commercial inspection program. Our goal is to get into businesses and residences to try to make sure that we have improved fire safety code compliance, which is things like working smoke alarms. We really think this is a start to making the difference to save those lives in the community so that we don't have another year of 10 fire deaths. We're increasing our funding for our health and wellness program, which is specifically psychological supports for our wellness programs. And to maintain our service levels in our growing community, We're looking to add 2 new 911 communications operators, and this will be the first staffing level increase in nearly a decade. We're also looking to add 24 new firefighters to maintain our response times in preparation for the opening of Station 215, which is at Countryside in Goreway. And lastly, we're looking to add 2 new training staff to help us meet the provincial certification and training legislation, which again came in without any provincial funding support. I'll just jump ahead a slide here. Our capital budget request is approximately $8 million, with 68% of that coming from tax-based capital, and the remaining 30% is from development charges. So our capital budget highlights include a number of investments to service a growing city. Our plan over the next 3 years is to add 13 apparatus to our fleet. In 2022, this specifically includes 2 new electric fire trucks and a new hazardous material truck. We will also be replacing various pieces of firefighting and personal protective equipment, things like bunker gear, self-contained breathing apparatus, helmets, and hoses. And finally, we are looking to maintain our communications equipment and our radio equipment while preparing to be ready for next generation 911, which comes online in 2025. So with that, I just want to again acknowledge our team that 2022 was a really tough year with fires and floods and COVID, and they just did an incredible job. I know lots of them are watching here online, and just want to thank them and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Chief Boyes. We do have members up for questions. Councillor Fertini.
The fire department, all the work they do is really hard. It's one of the hardest jobs. I seen that you guys have 4 people checking for smoke alarms.
Yes.
Fire hydrants, do we know where they are? Are they all numbered?
We know, so we do, as the fire department, we do know where they are. They are on our computer-aided dispatch system. Our trucks can see them when they're responding to a call. They come up on the computer screen. So we know that if we're going to 123 Smith Street, we know that the nearest hydrant is, in front of 125 Smith Street, for instance.
And just one thing I noticed driving around, not this storm, the last storm, half these fire hydrants are all full of snow. So when we do our communications, maybe we could put a letter. And I seen up at Professor Lake, the guy was cleaning it, but you go further down, you barely see the top, when you get there. I was wondering if you actually know where these fire hydrants are, or you gotta start looking. So,
fortunately, we do, but it is something that we could even message more,
Yeah.
Especially on social media or public communication, to get people to clear it out a couple feet around the hydrant. Sometimes they will be clearing their driveway or clearing a sidewalk, and they may, block that hydrant, and we really need to get to those hydrants quickly. As you know, seconds matter in a fire, so that's super important.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fertini. Next, Councillor Paleski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Bill. Doctor. Fuel costs for fire are different than transit, right? We can't piggyback off of transit because they're more direct to the stations?
Through Chair, that's correct. We have a separate contract we actually have with Esso and Petro Canada, so the trucks can fill up in their own areas. That way they couldn't come to us.
With a card lock system or something?
Yes.
Is it directly with Esso and Petro?
Directly
or is
with,
it through a middle
yes, and we just
person?
had a new contract late last year for the next, I believe, 3 years with a couple of years of options.
Okay.
So, yeah.
The new hires, Chief.
Yep.
You have the new hires for your 2023, but have you unfilled 2022 new hires?
So 2022, I don't believe we had any new net staff additions. We've only had 2 net new staff over the last 3 years. So our vacancies are typically filled. We're even already proactively preparing to fill these firefighters that are in this budget this year.
You have no new net hires for the last 3 years, you said?
We had 2.
Sorry.
2 net new hires to the FD equivalent over the last 3 years.
Over the last 3 years, okay. In your, in the fire's budget, do you have any money that's representing any, taken out for any land acquisitions?
So the money for land acquisition would sit with Realty, I believe, with Commissioner Morrison's team.
Okay.
But we have had money approved for land acquisition for Station 216, 2 years ago, maybe 2 to 3 years ago. I just have to check that to get the exact
But
year.
land acquisitions and buildings, they don't come into your budget, right? You identify, but they don't.
Correct, yeah, land acquisition sits with Realty, and then all of our buildings would sit with BDC in Public Works.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pleshy. Next, we have Councillor Keenan.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Bill, and to all the firefighters for the work that you guys do. I wasn't tall enough to be a firefighter, so I'm here. I had just one quick question, and I think it's a great initiative. It's a great initiative when we see the fire trucks being wrapped for Black History Month, for Movember and cancer awareness. My question is that in your budget, is the fire department's budget, or does that come from somewhere else? And if so, what is the cost every time we wrap them, right? Because I assume it's only wrapped for that month, and then it's taken away and redone. So first question is that part of the firefighting budget, and how much is it?
Perfect. Through the chair, multi-part answer. So typically, we've done trucks in the past for Movember, for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Those have been funded by the association, by the union, and sponsors. The truck we have for Black History Month is the first one that's done by the city, and it was about $6,000 approximately that we paid for.
Okay, great. That is my only question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Keenan. Seeing no further questions, Mr. Clerk, do we have any online? No. Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Boyce.
Thank you.
And we'll next move on to presentation from Public Works and Engineering. Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you very much to Chair and members of Council. I'd like to thank our team today for an awesome job they did on the budget for 2023, as well as acknowledge our Union President, Fab Cazzola, who was here. He left just before I got up here. So to start off with our department overview, this department is responsible for the city's infrastructure, design and construction, maintenance, and traffic operations, which includes parking management for city facilities, roads, bridges, and culverts. Our team works efficiently, effectively to work with council priorities, achieve environmental objectives, and prioritize safety, and always seeking for continuous improvement. The divisions within Public Works are building design and construction, capital works, facilities, maintenance and operations, road maintenance, operations, and fleet. Some of the 2023 spotlights are our road resurfacing program with Sandalwood Parkway, road widening on Goreway Drive, as well as our Center for Innovation and our Community Center for Revitalization, which includes Victoria Park and Howden Recreation Centers. There are more, but these are our main spotlights for this year, for 2023. Our budget goals to deliver capital infrastructure for roads, bridges, buildings, stormwater management, implement the active transportation master plan and the transportation master plan, deliver efficient maintenance, winter maintenance services, provide and perform traffic operations, parking technical reviews of development applications, as well as supporting city building and growth. Maintain city-owned buildings to ensure safety and security, accessibility and cleanliness, and work with the asset management team to establish levels of service and maintain our state of good repair for all our public works infrastructure. Provide project management for state of good repair, new construction, and interior design projects. Implement opportunities for improving energy efficiencies in existing facilities, new developments, and to meet greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. Implement new technologies to make our roads safer to support the region's Vision Zero initiative. As you know, terms of council, some of our budget drivers, legislative requirements, our asset management, our minimum maintenance standards, our universal design and OADA accessible standards, and the Environmental Assessment Act. Aging infrastructure, state of good repair for all our public works infrastructure and citywide facilities, as well as follow and utilize the accessibility standards when doing any major or minor work to these facilities. Growth, move people more efficiently, increase green communities, more facilities, increase safety and security. Economic pressures, inflation this year, market conditions, which have caused some expense with fuel and construction on roads. Technical advancements, traffic signalization advancements to LED, computerized asset management systems, and computerized maintenance management systems as well. Operating highlights and budget priorities for 2023, improved level of security at city-owned facilities, as well as continue installation of the speed cameras throughout the city, implement active transportation, which includes the road calming, deliver winter maintenance service levels and improvements, administer the asset and work management system, support the asset management system and the maintenance management systems. Preventative demand maintenance programs, ensuring that all facilities are safe and well maintained in compliance with all provincial regulations. The budget for this year for Public Works and Engineering is $94 million. And as you can see, wages and salaries make up 46%. Contracted services and repair, maintenance, and materials are another 38% of that. Property taxes are 91% of that total, with contributions to reserves and user fees the remaining amount. Some of the capital priorities for 2023 include construction of the Susan Fennell zero carbon retrofit from the Building Design and Construction Group, Howden Recreation Center, the animal shelter design, the electrical vehicle charging stations throughout the city. There's 3 locations. Center for Innovation Design and Construction, and Embleton Recreation Center design and construction over the 3-year period. For capital works, road improvements and widenings with active transportation and intersection improvements, road resurfacing program, as well as bridge and culvert rehabilitation programs, road maintenance, operations and fleet, new replacement of equipment and vehicles as part of this sustainable fleet strategy, convert street lights, bulbs to LED, and street light monitoring systems, as well as facility parking lot rehabilitations for rec centers. So we do all the rehabilitation. The capital budget overview. For 2023, we're looking at $128 million for capital. Through this, we're looking at external recoveries, federal and provincial grants of 12%. Tax base is 26%. The Canada Build Fund is 28%, and development charges 26%, which makes up for the $128 million. And that's the Public Works and Engineering 2023 budget.
Okay. First question is Councillor Fertini.
I'm a little bit confused. On some slides, you have Howden and Victoria Park construction. And then we go to another slide, it only shows Howden, the amount. Where's Vic Park?
So through the chair, we do have Victoria Park, and it's ready for tender. And there's $28.3 million for that project.
Okay.
It also includes $2.8 million for the Sports Hall of Fame that's within the facility.
Okay, great. On the snow, when they put these plows down, do they get paid extra? Or it's the same flat rate?
So there's a flat rate, there's a standby rate, which they get paid. But then when they get called out, it's a flat rate, whether they're plowing or they're salting, it's a flat rate.
So the other day when we had that 2 centimeters, it's a flat rate, or when they put the plows on, the computer marks that they get paid extra because it slows down the vehicles?
It's, from what I know, it's a flat rate
It's a
as
flat
soon as
rate.
that truck goes out
Because as far as.
per hour for
Yeah.
the
When you
the
put the
driver.
plow down, the rate goes up because it slows down the vehicles. And they shouldn't be putting plows down until 5 centimeters, you're driving around the roads and they got these plows on the ground, and really it's all. So when's the contract though?
So we're in the sixth of
One
that
more
7-year contract.
One more year.
So we are putting together some options that we'll bring a report back to council in the fall, because we'd have to go back to we'd have to go out to tender November for the following year, because it's a big process.
Are we starting to work on this for the
We've
contract
already
now?
started working on, so the main piece of the contract, but there's other parts to it that we're going to include with windrows and sidewalks, and include that as options in the contract so that we can look at all the different variables when we come back to council with.
You know what I've noticed in the last 3 or 4 years, like these single axles, I get the roads are small. But when you have a single axle, you don't have a side wing. They're plowing the road, but they actually 8 feet on each side from the curb. So really, some residents has to clean the driveway, the boulevard, plus half the road to get out. You're not actually going right to the curbs, the other thing. And on the sidewalk machines, so who repairs all the grass that gets damaged? Do we do it, or they go back?
We have, the companies do it in the spring, but we do go back in the spring. So we do full inspections through our MMS group, and everything's marked down, and the companies, the contractors go back in the spring and replace all the stuff.
So this year, we saved a lot of money on the plowing, I guess. There's not much snow, right?
So, touch wood so far.
So far.
But we could be getting 10 centimeters today.
Yeah, today. One thing I keep asking year after year, we got this green salt, it's treated, which is about $38 a ton more than compared to regular salt. Why are we throwing treated salt when it's -3, -4 degrees? Treated salt is used at -20. Up north they use the sand because the salt doesn't work. But we're throwing this treated salt like on these boulevards, like you can actually sweep it, you got a dump truck full. And it's money when you can use regular salt.
So we should be using regular salt. Is it region roads or city roads?
No, it's, I see going up ahead.
So I'll definitely go back and
They're
look.
full. I understand when it's -20, you use it. That's why it's treated, and it's more expensive. But, we haven't had a really cold winter besides really 1 or 2 days, and it's all over the place, so. Okay,
For the chair,
thank you.
I'll look into that right away.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Rob, for the presentation. I just have a quick question for clarification. We had a resident post on social media saying that there's $500,000 or something still allocated for the Caledon Barn in Ward 1. I just wanted to confirm, because we did bring forward a motion to make sure that all of that spending and funding was stopped and that the money was returned back into reserve for bigger and better priorities. So just to confirm back for that resident, that budget no longer exists in our books
Through
for
the
this year or the years moving forward.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Councillor Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a couple questions in regards to traffic calming measures. However, the document that just came through answers some of my questions, but I think I'll just go for some clarification on it, if that's okay. So we have for traffic calming measures, which is a massive council priority, I'm seeing the amount of 200,000 per ward pairing. So is that 200,000 including the 40,000 from 2022, or is that?
So through the chair, it's 200,000 in total, which is 40,000 per ward pairing.
Okay.
I know there was discussion with council about a month ago with regards to looking at monies for 2023. So we do have 600,000 left after the 200 in the account, so we can look at more traffic calming moving forward for 2023. That will be absorbed in the from the 2022 capital money. So there's 22 capital funding available.
Okay, so how much is left in the 2022?
So 2022 for the actual speed humps is 40,000 per ward pairing. Some wards have no money left. I think 3 of the pairings have the full 40,000. And the speed humps we're looking at are about 5,000 per, depending on how many we put out in a certain location.
Okay, and then past that, so now coming into 2023, we have 200,000 per ward.
So there's no funding in 2023, but we have available funding in 2022 that we can use of up to $600,000.
Okay. Does any of that funding go towards communication to the residents for when we're putting in the speed humps? Because what we're getting a lot of complaints on is when people want them and then we put them in and then they want them removed. So can any of that funding, or does that go into communications, or how do we plan to deal with that moving forward?
So through the chair, we do have funding for communications, whether we go through corporate communications with some of that, or we do it ourselves where we put out literature to the residents around. We also have our own signage shop that we have money for each year, that the signs that we put out are from our own shop. So it's over and above, but we have a separate budget for that.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keenan. Next up is Councillor Pelushi.
Councillor Keenan, can I have that mic, please? Sorry. Pass notes. Thanks, Rob. Rob, some of the same questions, and actually one I forgot to ask Chief. How much money do you have in your budget for community engagement? And how much money do you have in your budget for just communications?
So through the chair, specifically, I'll have to get those numbers for you, but I can
sure.
get those by the end of today.
And then hires, your 2022 hires for the, with your 2023 budget, how many of those are the same?
So through the chair, we don't have any of the same, but we do have, of the 12 positions, 7 were hired, 2 have become vacant, so they're vacant right now that we're rehiring, and 3 are in the recruitment stage of the 12 positions.
Of the total number
of the 12
new hires for 2023?
No, 2023 is totally separate.
Okay.
This is just from 2022. So there's an additional 13 for 2023, of which those 13, some of them are revenue or expenditure neutral because we're deleting some of the contract services to pay for the security staff.
Okay. For the implementation of speed humps, going back to some of Councillor Keenan's questions. So we originally put in the budget 40,000 per ward?
Through the chair, per ward pairing.
Per ward pairing, 20,000 per ward, could say. And that does roughly how many speed humps? 20,000.
8 to 10 is the 40,000.
8 to 10 speed humps?
Humps.
40,000, okay,
Yeah.
40,000, 8 to 10. Now, speed humps or speed bumps?
So they're permanent speed bumps, bumps that are asphalt. And
The asphalt ones, not the concrete ones?
not the concrete ones. So the asphalt ones, obviously, the price is much better, and we can put in more.
They don't last as long.
I won't say they won't last as long. Concrete will take a beating in the wintertime, whereas asphalt's a little more forgiving sometimes.
Okay.
But-
I thought asphalt is, chance starts coming up when a plow's going by,
Well,
as opposed to concrete staying there.
with the cold and the concrete, it has the ability to crumble, and with all the salt on the road.
Okay.
So, it's comparable.
Howden Rec Center, it's in your budget?
Correct. Howden Rec Center is in the budget, and it's, sure, come on, Lucius.
So it's sitting at 30 million, I believe? That's where it's sitting at today?
For Mr. Chair, Howden is in the budget.
Yeah.
It's in the previous budget was 24 mil.
24?
Yeah, the current Class A estimate is around 30, 34. So it's going to be ready for tender later in Q3 of this year.
Okay. I had some questions during the budget, and thank you for this coming out, some of our answers to some of our questions, but unfortunately, we're just getting it, so I have to ask some of the other questions that I have. And one particular question that I did have then that Anand had kind of came on to comment, in the Parks and Rec Master Plan, and forgive me if I'm out of place, but it was identified during that time, or it was a discussion during that time, that Bramalea in particular, and now with Riverstone on top of that geographic area, has a lot more service for recreation than anywhere else in the city. And they're like older facilities and all that, and when Bramalea was Bramalea, and it was a little bit different, but is that correct in terms of, that was the service level? Sorry, Bill, maybe this will come up in community services.
Yeah, through the chair, we can take it then. Anand, I believe, is online, but I think you're aware too, we're doing the Parks and Rec master plan refresh right now, I believe next week. They're going to be sitting down with councilors to kind of get their input and then go out and get more feedback. We're right in year 5 of 10 right now, so we're going to bring that back as part of the refresh to look at it. But if there's a specific question, Anand is online, or you can wait till I'm up next after Lucius, and happy to touch on it.
Okay, I guess my specific question was, at that time, did we determine that we were going to pull one of the rec centers? There was a lot of rec centers out that way needed help. There was a pool that needed to be replaced. Howden needed to be done. Then Vic Park burnt down. But there was a number of rec centers out there because they're older. They needed to be refurbished. At that time, did we pull the plug on one of them?
So through the chair, maybe I'll ask Anand Patel if he's online.
Okay.
For sure. Thanks, Chief. Through the chair, it was the pool at Howden Recreation Center that you're probably referring to. So the pool has been removed, but the community space was still necessary. So that's still in the plans to make sure we're servicing the community.
Okay, and then at that time, that Parks and Rec master plan, I think identified and I referenced that master plan at the time, but it might have been just the discussions that were ongoing at that time. There was a lot of other facilities out in that area that needed something.
So I guess the community space is what we're referring to.
No, I'm sorry, and I mean more of like, because they're older facilities, they needed some kind of, refurbishment or update or something like that.
Yeah, so that's correct. So that's the reason why we are where we are with Balmoral being redone, Howden being redone, and Vic Park being redone. So that was the rationale for us to go forward with actual reconstruction of the facilities.
Okay. So I have to kind of dissect the what council was just provided, some of the answers to the questions that we were asking. I guess in terms of snowplow, Rob, we had a really great meeting. Councilor Barr, myself, and your staff, talking about snow clearing services in the city of Brampton. And I think I might have mentioned it to you at that meeting. But I really feel like even the lack of snow, saying that today with snow outside, lack of snow we've had this year as opposed to other years, I really feel like there's been a lack of service that have been provided by some of the contractors to to our residents. You know, I have streets in my area that still haven't been plowed, and the majority of the time is because of the amount of parked cars on that road. You know, we've talked for a number of years about windrows and that kind of clearing and stuff, and you know, I know that that's a huge addition to the budget. You hear good things out in Vaughan, but you hear some troubling things too. Do you talk to your counterparts out in Vaughan, and do you know what's kind of happening on their side of it on windrows?
So through the chair, Frank does do a lot of meetings with Vaughan and Mississauga, and Vaughan is having a lot of problems with their windrows. 90% of their complaints are windrows. So it's a big issue, and I guess the second part to that is once you plow your streets, you got to go back and do the windrows after. Most of the complaints we get on windrows is, you know, that we've just put the windrow there, and people are trying to get out of their driveway, and if we have to come back after the fact, it's still going to take up to 24 hours sometimes once we get all the roads done to actually go back and do the windrows. So there are some options that we're looking at where you can do it all at the same time. It's different equipment, so it would be advantageous to do it as a new contract. But that's something that we didn't discuss in our last meeting with the council of pairs because we don't have the exact information on what that can look like. But we definitely want to come back to the council group to actually discuss those different options and then obviously go out to tender with those different options.
So, Rob, my only issue is there really isn't any comparables out there. If we at the City of Brampton were looking at clearing windrows, you couldn't go to Vaughan to see what they're doing because it's different out there. They don't have the population that we have. They don't have the amount of houses. They don't have even the density that we have. Go to Etobicoke. I think they do it in Etobicoke, right? And yet I think it's very specific to certain areas of Etobicoke, so you can't look at that area. They don't do it in Mississauga, but I don't know where else they do it.
So through the chair, there's not a lot out there, but we are going to benchmark who does and their success rate, as well as it'll be optioned separately within the tender process, so we can either pick it or not pick it, depending on obviously the price and what that cost is to the taxpayer. But when we do the tender process, it will be option A, option B, option C, and so on. And that's definitely going to be reviewed with the council group to make sure that we're hitting all the spots that are the most complaints coming through.
And I know that you're coming in the future with a report on that, and you know we're at kind of almost the end of our procurement year, one more year out or something. So we're going to be coming with that as well. Now, you know, I have to harp on the contractors this year because it's so fresh and so new. But that being said, how many extensions are there in the contract?
Through the chair, there's 3 one-year extensions, so it would be a total of a 10-year contract. However, we will be doing a debrief and with all the contractors at the end of the year, as we do at the beginning of the year, to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. We've had a couple meetings with some of them through the year because, as you said, there has been some hiccups on some of the streets where they're either missed or not done to curb. So that's definitely something that we'll be discussing with them at the end of the season.
Okay. The one question that I did have that was touched on in the discussion paper was the operation cost to run Riverstone against Loafers Lake or against Jim Archdeacon. And I see it's kind of in there. I need to get into it and dissect it a little bit, but that cost of operations of Riverstone seemed to be higher than a comparable recreation facility.
So through the chair, I'll have.
Chief, I guess I can wait until you come up.
Sure, I can jump up, yeah.
All right,
Okay.
whenever you're done.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you, Councillor Pelletier. Before we go to second questions, I want to deal with first questions. So, Councillor Medeiros.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Rob, for the presentation. Just very quickly, piggybacking on Councillor Keenan's questions regarding the speed bump. So are you going to report back, can we get the information about what wards still haven't accessed this fund? Because I must confess, I was kind of, Councillor Keenan is the one who informed me that this fund even existed, so I don't know where I was. So if you can report back on each ward's what's existing there, you're saying there's $600,000 that's there still sitting. Do you?
So through the chair, there's, I think in wards 3 and 4, the full 40 could still be there. I'll have to get back to you on that one. But there is, I know there was talk about another maybe 50,000 per ward pairing, which would put us at about $250,000, which we could absorb from the 2022 capital funding.
Okay.
Anything above that, we may have to come back.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, do we need to give you direction to come back and provide that? Can you just give us a breakdown, each ward's available existing funding for?
Through the chair, absolutely.
Oh, just us two? Ah.
And through the chair, absolutely. We have a list of, of worst roads in each of the ward pairings that we can put forward to you and have discussions on where those speed bumps should actually go, or best spots for them.
And to increase the fund, you're going to come back with a plan on if we want to increase it, what that would give us?
Through the chair, correct.
Okay, so you don't need no formal direction then? No. Okay, and through you, Mr. Mayor, the last question, for example, and I don't want to get into a debate about this or anything, but speaking to some sort of folks in the industry and construction and so on, so you get a place like, our innovation center, we have it on the books and we have money earmarked. From a lot of people I speak with, it almost doesn't make sense for us to get into this nonsense of trying to build and project manage a huge construction project where the industry themselves are struggling to get material, workers, et cetera, et cetera. And I know how, we manage a contract, but, and I think further discussions has to be, what makes sense, us sort of directly managing other, we might want, if there is an academic partner, and I don't want to belabor this point, but it almost, to a certain degree, there has to be that sort of rationale point where we say it just doesn't make financial rationale. And the operations of this, it almost makes sense for us to lease the land and have an academic institution build their own innovation center, work with the library, and we support them where we can. So I don't want to belabor the point, and I know, but are we going to have those discussions, CEO, maybe in the new year, or going on some of those priority projects? I know that was part of the plan with your priority projects.
Through the chair and specifically to the CFI, we're going to have that discussion very soon.
Okay.
I'm aiming to have a report before council March 29th.
Yeah, and thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. And it's not a question of, it's just in terms of the timeliness and, if we get it on the private side, they can probably do it faster, quicker, cheaper, and we don't know where this inflation game is going. So, okay, that's great. Thank you so much.
And I've got one quick question myself, and that is the automated speed enforcement cameras. I see that we're continuing our rollout, and that's referenced in the slide presentation. I still remember Councillor Pelletier when we were speaking to this 4 years ago about how excited we were about this enabling legislation that gave this ability to cities. I think it's a very effective tool. If you speed and it hits your pocketbook, it changes behavior, and we see that everywhere you put them. I believe Toronto approved 150, and I thought our council identified 150 as 150 community safety zones as well. So I know the rollout's been a little bit slow. I think that's a capacity issue. I guess my question is, can we get to 150 this year? What would it take?
So through the chair, I'll pass this on to Paul.
It's a good side look, thank you. Through to you, Mr. Mayor. The answer really lies in Public Works, whether they're going to be able to put 150 out or not. That's not my area. I can tell you we are endeavoring to support the 150 in the way the court processes go, and that's another piece of the puzzle. It's one thing to put out the speed detection devices. It's another thing to ensure that all those infractions go through court process.
So we can talk about that piece a little bit more, but as far as the deployment of the models, it rests in public.
And we're dependent on the, an adequate supply of JPs for the processing of that?
Yeah, it's very, through to you, Mr. Mayor, it's really a fine work of art in the sense that we are waiting for more processing ability through the province, through Toronto, who processes our photographs. We're waiting for the JPs to hear some of those offenses. We're looking at screening hearing officers so we can take that domain over completely.
And so I guess what my hope is that if Toronto can't handle the processing of our tickets, then we find a way to have our own, because I don't want community safety to be jeopardized how slow this process is. One thing I heard at the doors this fall more than anything was street racing, speeding, community safety. I look around this table, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of nods. Again and again, people have said it was reckless driving, particularly if people say, look at that school, or look at that park, and that car raced by. I even had residents ask me, would I sit on their porch with them and watch cars go by? And so this is an irritant in the city, but the one thing that everyone said is when one of those cameras came in, it was, a sense of massive relief, because it worked. You put up a sign that says, please slow down, people don't, but those cameras work. And so it's taking too long, in my opinion. I want us to have the capacity to get these out. And there's 150 community safety zones. I don't want to see 25. How many cameras do we have right now?
Through the chair, we have 50.
50. I don't want to see 50. I want to see all 150 designated community safety zones with that level of protection. And, if a child is saved, is walking across the street to a playground, then thank goodness we have urgency on this. So I'd love to hear maybe before the end of this budget deliberation process, if any additional funding is required, to be able to either have the processing in-house, or we put the cameras up and there's more pressure on the Toronto, on the Toronto side to be able to meet our servicing, because they can't meet our servicing, then, other cities are going to start adding these too. We can't all be dependent on the same resource. And so I just don't want us to be lackadaisical about this. Councillor Fertini.
So, Rob, going back on those roads, remember, we always talked about this, I've been saying that I think we should look into Richmond Hill. I think they did it 2 years ago, they've been having problems.
So through the chair, that is one of our options that we're going to look at.
I think a lot of people, they see the snow and it's easy to clean. They don't understand the process. Like you said, you clean it, you got to go back, have these machines, cost money. What happens to the damage? And that's why Vaughan has been cutting down. You might have some curbs sticking out this much. When that comes down and cleans your snow and it breaks that curb, where are we going to get the calls here to come and fix it? I think if you actually look at the price for 2 years that we have to pay, I think it's cheaper to buy everyone a snowblower and do your own snow, because there's going to be a lot of damages. Richmond Hill's going through that now. They tried it. And their driveways, it is a small city compared to us. We got like, I think, 260,000 driveways. I think the last report, it was like $14 million.
Through the chair, we have 144,000 driveways.
That's
And
without
I
the
think
townhouse and stuff, yeah.
It's 47, it's a 3-year return on our money.
3 year.
And it would just be easier to provide.
Buy everyone a snowblower for $500.
Well, not necessarily buy them a snowblower, but go to the big shops and try to get 20% discounts and hand them out to all the
Yeah,
residents.
but a lot of these places, like, for the jokes aside, like Toronto or Richmond Hill or Vaughan that has that, they don't have the senior facility that we give to the seniors at $200 or $300.
Correct.
And when they do go clean the snow, they don't clean your whole driveway as a senior. They only do a path, and it might come 2 days later. They're kind of busy. Going back to the speed bumps, I know myself and Councillor Power, we did not use our 40,000. So there's 600,000 left. I think that should be divided equally per ward. That's 60,000. That means we get an extra 120,000 plus the 40 and divide it equally if we're going to do it.
So through the chair, we will take equal amounts of each area of ward pairings and put them out.
And
we don't have a full 600,000. That's what's left in the budget for, there are some other priorities that we have to take care of. Unless council wanted to approve more money for 2023, to go over and above that, we could do that as well.
And the other thing is, I know,
But you do have your $40,000.
yeah, well, I know you have the stats on the certain roads, but we're the ones getting the complaints, and before it goes out there, I want to know where they are, because I know, like, we talked about that road, myself and Council Power, where the accident happened, we know certain areas are really bad. And I think those should be done before people call on these complaints. Those are very dangerous areas.
So through the chair, we are meeting with each pairing. We do have a group of streets, but we will add the ones that we're getting the most complaints on and get a score for them and where they fit on that chart. And then look at your top 5 to 10.
The other thing on the concrete speed bumps, it's not a bunch of concrete, they fall in apart and all. If you look at these crosswalks, concrete expands in the winter, shrinks in summer. So when you got it towards asphalt and concrete, concrete goes up. When the plow comes down, it chips it. So it's better to do asphalt, they last a lot longer than concrete, and it's a lot cheaper. Today, concrete at $225 a meter, it's a lot more. So anyway, okay, thank you.
Councillor Pleshy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and we can probably talk about it when legislative services come up, but I really think it's time, if the procurement sits with you, or doesn't, it sits with legislative services, it's time for us to look at potential, it sits with you. It's one of you. It's time for us to look at other vendors. If the vendor that we currently are using is the issue, it's time to look at other vendors. From my recollection and understanding, that Toronto was taking all of these cameras down to them, and they continue to service them. So if that's the issue, then we need to get into that, and processing ourselves. I think we're big enough now where we can have our own processing center. We've talked about that a little bit, Paul, but I think it's time for us to start working on that as well. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you, Councillor Pleshy. Seeing no other questions, we can have a motion to receive the presentation moved by Councillor Vicente and seconded by Councillor Power. All those in favor? Motion carries. It is 3:45. Would council want to start on community services? We probably have time to complete it. Yeah. I'm looking to the indulgence of council. He's here.
Okay.
The chief seems hungry to present.
Sorry, I didn't wear my community services uniform, but I didn't think we'd get through it this fast. I will acknowledge Fabio, since I did acknowledge Paul Lecomte, so Fabio, our union partner. I am pleased to present the 2023 community services budget. Community service strives to provide the city with quality and accessible services that supports an inclusive and thriving community. Our team, as you know, is comprised of 5 divisions: community safety and well-being, cultural services, parks, maintenance and forestry, recreation, and service Brampton. And some interesting stats: we operate 30 recreation and 3 performing arts facilities, maintain over 29 hectares of parkland property, manage over 660,000 resident contacts through Service Brampton. We're implementing the Community Safety Action Plan, which we'll touch on today, and we coordinate over $1 million in support for Brampton's nonprofit and charitable sector through the Advanced Brampton Fund. Our budget goals are grounded in the provision of quality and accessible services to meet the demands of a growing and diverse community while being fiscally efficient, environmentally conscious, and socially connected. Our divisions accomplish this by empowering and connecting residents, supporting our creative and arts community, promoting healthy, safe, and active lifestyles, and providing a wide range of customer service options. Our budget drivers this year are really stemming from the council priorities, our master plans, all while serving a growing and diverse community. As we return to the new normal post-COVID world, we're still working to meet the shifting needs of our residents and our partners. We're working to maintain our aging infrastructure while servicing new areas of the city in a fiscally responsible manner. We also remain challenged by the changing seasonal weather patterns and recruiting enough staff to meet our community's demands and also the inflationary pressures. Our total expenditures for community services are $120.2 million, with 69% funded through property taxes and 31% through user fees and service charges. Labor costs account for 73% of our budget, with the remaining 27% driven by costs associated with repairs and maintenance, utilities and fuel, contracted services, and office and advertising expenses. Our total variance in 2023 is 6.6%, and we remain optimistic that year-end revenues will return closer to the projected numbers as we move a full year out of the pandemic. Our operating budget highlights include in the Community Safety Division 2 new staff additions to help implement the Community Safety Action Plan, which was approved by Council late last year, along with continued collaboration with our regional and community partners. In cultural services, we're looking at additional operating funds to support the Brampton Arts Organization in its last year of incubation before it becomes independent in 2024. We've also looked, as Council will recall, the increased funding to support the Advanced Brampton Fund for nonprofit and charity-based Brampton organizations. We're looking to add new staff to support the delivery of performing arts program across our facilities. And in parks, we're looking at an increase in part-time labor to support the growth in parks maintenance. We've also added 2 new staff to support the urban forest management program. In recreation, we'll be adding staff to support the opening of the new youth hub at Susan Fennell, which is projected to open near National Youth Week in May of 2023. We're also requesting additional funds and staff for Riverstone as it commences its first full fiscal year of operations in the budget. This year, the recreation team will also include in the annual operations of the outdoor rinks in the operating budget. To note, we're also looking with Service Brampton at a plan to reduce overnight labor hours between midnight and 7 a.m. This will bring us more in line with other municipalities and enable residents to utilize other online methods for service requests. 311 will be upstaffed approximately 20 days per year to address days and events that would see an increase in calls. Our capital budget request is $29.7 million, and that's mainly comprised of projects related to parks and recreation. Development charges fund 42% of the request, with cash in lieu of parkland funding nearly 35%, the remaining coming from tax-based capital and the Canada Community Building Fund. Capital highlights of this year's request include $10 million for new parks development through the Community Living Project, with $1 million allocated to each ward. We also have $9 million for the Gore Meadows Park construction that includes new fully lit cricket pitches, plus soccer and tennis amenities. We're also looking to add $1.2 million towards the Urban Forest Canopy Program, which will include the planting of thousands of trees and the upkeep of our trees and forests across the city. There's also millions of dollars in funding for new and stated good repair projects in all the parks, across the city. In recreation, 2023 is an exciting year for us with the opening of the new youth hub at Susan Fennell, also the opening in the spring of 2023 of the Collaborative Learning and Technology Center at Central Peel Secondary School that will focus on STEM programming. We'll also, in June 2023, be looking at the opening of the Atiba Hutchison box soccer court. Also to note, there's $1.5 million planned for the replacement of the turf at the Terry Fox Stadium, and again, continued funding for the replacement and repair of our recreation assets across city facilities. With respect to community safety, $401,000 is planned to support the Community Safety Action Plan to enable year 1 implementation and continuing with phase 2 of the Nurturing Neighborhoods program. For cultural services, over $800,000 is planned to support the continued implementation of the Culture Master Plan. This includes improvements in the maintenance of performing arts theaters and equipment, plus public art installations planned for Emancipation Park and downtown Brampton. Finally, there are funds for a feasibility study of an arts hub at the Flower City Community Campus. With respect to the referred matters, Council will note that a briefing note was provided on these referred matters related to parks, and there is the report on recreation that is shared in the budget agenda. And just with that, before I conclude, I also want to, being a newer Commissioner of Community Services, acknowledge the whole team that we have. We have thousands of employees, part-time and full-time, that do really an incredible job. And me, as Fire Chief coming in, really understanding the tremendous work they do for the community. So I just want to thank them. Thank you very much.
Councillor Santos. I was about to say there's no questions, but Councillor Santos.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I brought this up in one of our briefing meetings, so I'll just bring it up publicly. There are some items within the community services capital budget related to state of good repair or renovations or whatever to the Civic Center in particular. And with TMU moving in and possibly renovating that whole entire space accordingly, I don't know whether or not those items should be included in this year's budget or in this budget. And I actually don't think that some of those things should actually happen. There's, for example, $50,000 allocated to a concrete retaining wall for a flower bed, as well as some renovations or state of good repairs for Lester B. Pearson Theater, $200,000, something like that. So any comments on whether or not we should include that or not?
Maybe I can start and I'll defer maybe over to the CAO, but through the chair, some of those improvements for Lester B. Pearson Theater will be things that regardless of the new medical school there, that we'll still need to be able to use, or if it's used in another location, it'll certainly be transferable. Knowing that the budget was prepared in advance of that announcement, we would certainly look to make sure that we're allocating those funds and not duplicating or doing any extra work that needs to be done. But maybe I'll defer to the CAO if there's anything else to add on that.
Thank you, Chief, and through the chair. There were several repairs for the Civic Center. Most of those have been removed. I'm looking at the BDC to confirm that they have been removed. The theater, we are maintaining the theater there. We're also going to be using the basement for some IT infrastructure and security as well. So those repairs are needed and will be staying with us, but everything else will be removed. We did mention it as part of our Gage Park report that some of that money that we got back after we canceled those repairs were going to be used to offset the expenditures at Gage Park.
Sounds good.
On that note, I'll turn it over to Lucius. Perhaps he may have something else he may want to add.
For you, Mr. Chair, yes, CEO is correct. All the works that was proposed for the BCC has been cancelled. And as you mentioned, some of the monies will use for the Gage Park project. So far there is nothing which is going to be undertaken there anymore.
Okay, great. So that 50,000 for the concrete flower bed will be removed as well. I'm nitpicking, I know, I get it. It's just we're throwing a lot of money over to TMU for the medical school, and justifiably so. But I want to be a little bit careful on how much more we invest if they're going to be renovating the whole building. And just a reminder that we spent, I think it was $14 million or so to renovate Lester B. Pearson Theater. In 2019, we opened it, and then during COVID, we weren't even able to use it as a community. And so to actually maintain that use is for the community, for performing arts, is going to still be very important to us, I think. Thank you.
Councillor Flushing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have some answers
For Riverstone?
Okay.
So for Riverstone, I believe it's about $1.4 million in operating costs, net operating costs that you see. Loafers Lake, I think, was about 1.25. So there is a difference. Speaking with the team, there's some subtle differences in the facilities, the saltwater pool, more squash courts, a bit bigger fitness room. However, what we're going to do after our first year of operations is then reconcile those expenses and see if it is in fact at that 1.4, if revenues increase, if expenses decrease and so forth, and then bring that back. But that was our best estimate after about half a year of operation last year.
Okay, yeah, because that really seems high. That's what I was kind of thinking that. But does that have anything to do with the lands in the back or anything like that? We don't program anything back there, right?
So maybe I'll defer to Anand or Ed Fagan with our parks team if there is any
I don't think we
operations in the
program
back.
anything back there.
Not that I'm aware of, but I'll just do a check with them in case there is. The silence assumes no.
Yeah, no, silence is there. Through the chair, I can help. There's no programming that's formalized in the back. I do know that there is some community members that use it for passive use, but no programs to be established.
Chief, did Howden receive any grants? Is that the only facility that we're building that hasn't received any grants?
Through the chair, I'd have to check with BDC if we did receive any construction grants for that. I know with Chris Gibson, but maybe Lucius will come here. Not that I'm aware of.
Here, Mr. Chair, off the top of my head, I can't recall, but I will check and get back to you.
I'm looking, I'm seeing that Earnscliffe received a grant. Bramley Tennis Club received a grant. And a few others, but. Okay. Chief, the question that I had around hires.
Yes. So through the chair, all those have been filled.
And so the 2022 and everything up to date, those have been filled. These are new asks.
These will be net
And
new
your
asks.
asks were how many, sorry?
There were 20 net new positions asked.
And I know you're up here for community services, Chief, but I forgot to ask, or maybe I did ask, how much you budget for community engagement and communications in fire?
For fire, we have it contained within our advertising expenses, which is about $123,000. But that will include things like radio ads, newspaper ads, TV ads.
That does include things like that?
That does include like
Okay.
that, yeah, that we would do phone drops that we might do to say there's a new fire safety blitz going on, things like that.
Is it completely separate from prevention?
It's all contained within the overall department budget.
Okay, but like prevention is so community engagement, right?
Actually, be more public fire life safety education that would hold a significant amount of it.
Right.
Yes.
So
I can find out the exact amount in fire life safety education.
No.
Okay.
because that's a separate animal altogether. So, but overall in fire, it's around $123,000 that you have for
Advertising.
For advertising
Yes.
and community engagement.
That would all be primarily included within that, unless there was the exception of some small amounts of printed materials that we would hand out. But the majority of it be contained within advertising.
Okay. And Chief, you mentioned the next Parks and Rec master plan. We're undergoing that now?
So, yeah, through the chair, there's a refresh right now. Councilors, I believe it's the 2nd and 3rd of March, depending on your schedules, the consultant is going to come around and discuss your thoughts, your feedback, the future direction of Parks and Recreation, given that we're halfway through the plan and it's time to do an update and a refresh.
Okay. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Really, you guys are really the front-facing and first point of contact with many of our services. I really love the work that we're doing around Service Brampton, or whatever everyone coined it, and I really appreciate that support. Something I've always harped on for every year, I always look at the gyms, and my comment is always that, I rejoined the Y, I was a long-time member. With all these gyms out there that offer, Shoppers World, I think it's $1, and I know we don't do it from a business perspective, but when I hear some comments, for example, at a recent town hall that we had, the coffee chat, and someone who's an artist said that there's no space in Brampton. We hear that consistently. I know Councillor Santos is taking the lead on this with the arts group. you know, I assume that we're doing an audit from an arts, see what space we have available. But if I looked at Susan Fennell Center, and we have that gym there, and the equipment there, some of that equipment is kind of outdated. For us to refurbish that equipment and so on, does it not make sense to take that equipment out and use it as a dedicated space for the arts community? And I know that's something that would be council that would have to direct. But I just see, you know, but I do know, for example, I think at Cassie Campbell, a lot of people use the gym equipment there because there's no other, so I don't know. I just feel that, you know, in this day and age, for us to have, you know, gym equipment, knowing that A, we're under so much pressure for space, B, there's gyms in the surrounding area. So I guess, you know, that's a consideration, and I assume there might be an audit done, or you guys do an inventory of space. But would that sort of, is that something that we've looked at, or is that something?
So I think that's certainly, through the chair, something we can look at. We look at now with cultural services that has just moved over into community services. Really talking with Kelly and a lot of synergies between those two groups. Under the cultural services portfolio, there is a feasibility study for FCC, for arts and culture, to look and see if that is an arts hub. And in speaking with Kelly too, she will tell you that really is a deficit for cultural space in Brampton. So I think these are opportunities where we can look at, which might fall in line in the discussions with the Parks and Rec master plan too, about how we deliver some of those services, to your point.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I don't know the costs of refurbishment of these gyms, through you, Mr. Mayor. And I know Councillor Keenan and myself, we hear from community groups who want space, and certainly we need to serve them, but really from a cultural or art perspective, in our neck of the woods, we don't have too many offerings. So I think that's something I'd love for you to take under consideration, and maybe it's for a future discussion with council on redirecting those spaces, because for us to be investing all this money in equipment where, you know, there's gyms available, just, to me, it doesn't make sense we do that. So I'll just leave that as a consideration. I guess my last question then is regarding our that program for underprivileged, or that program, what's that program
Active
called?
Assist through
The
Recreation?
Active Assist.
Yes, for
now,
low income.
I know every year we always reach its max.
Yes.
Are we seeing those type of numbers as our population keeps growing, similar to the transit conversation? You guys also are dealing with those pressures. Is that an area that, what's the latest on that? Do we still have a lot of applications? Are there people who are not getting that assistance?
Sure, so I'll get, in one moment, I'll get on to weigh in on the actual usage. One thing we're looking at is community services this year to bring back, is, for lack of a better word, a refresh of that program, potentially increasing the threshold above the LICO rate, they call it, low income cutoff rate.
Okay.
So we're looking at some different options to bring that back to council later this year, but if Anand's online, maybe he can talk about the uptake of that program.
Thank you, Chief, and through the chair. Yeah, you're right on, Councillor. We have seen a slow ramp up. There are families that have reached out, and we've continued to reach out to those that have used the Active Assist program in the past. So it is not where it was in 2019, but we are slowly seeing families reach out and get Active Assist back on their accounts.
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I would hate to think that, you know, especially knowing how socially conscious our council is when it comes to, you know, leading initiatives like, you know, free transit for seniors. And so I would hope that, you know, there's a way that we think about how we can ensure that no one gets turned away. And I know that that's impossible, like I'm not, but I would love if folks are looking for access to, you know, for recreation, because we know how recreation is expensive. You go out with your kids and you try to do something, it's through the roof, right? So I just hope that, you know, we can look at it, be it through advertising, because I know through the seniors transit thing, we were looking at offsetting revenue. So if that could be a consideration, you know, just tell us some options of what we need to do to ensure that every family, considering that our population is growing quick, we have new Canadians, you know, I'd hate to hear, you know, because there's that sort of silent folks out there who just don't get access to recreation. So, you know, yeoman's work, and I thank you so much, and I look forward to some sort of options and some thoughts around that.
Certainly, yeah,
Thank
we'll bring
you
that
so much.
report back later this year.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Next up is Councillor Fortini.
Very quickly, going back, I think, what was it, about 3 months ago, we had some seniors asking about free gyms. We added, there's supposed to be a report coming.
That's part of the agenda.
Where agenda?
The budget agenda, the report's a part of it.
Yeah. So
One of the
when's
items
that-
that we
what's- I'm
held.
asking, when's that coming?
We held it, what item is it?
Through the chair, it's included in the agenda, yeah.
Is it?
Item 8.2.
8.2.
Staff report on recreation cost analysis for free older adult
get to it.
programming.
That's it. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chambry asked.
Councillor Brar.
Thank you so much. So today was a very important day for a lot of parents, waking up at 5:30 in the morning to apply for the Brampton recreation programs. And I'm sure, just like other cities, we experienced that there's a lot of people, a lot of parents trying to come into these programs and, and sign up for their kids. But I think what we're seeing is there's an increase of population, increased demand for these recreation programs. Is there anything in our budget that we're doing to improve that, and maybe even the system, just to make sure that going forward we're making it easier for parents?
Yes, thank you, through the chair to Councillor Brar. One of the positions we have specifically in recreation is to work with the Explore program, or formerly the Perfect Mind, to try to really optimize the functionality of it. We totally understand that there's so many people that want to register. Today there was a massive influx of people across 311, across the recreation programs. I know they had about 10,000 approximately registrations by shortly after 10 a.m. and it's probably grown a lot since then, but with 30 facilities and 50 different programs, and there is a lot. I think that's something that staff person that's going to work on. We're also in consultation with the vendor to try to improve the functionality of it. If you recall, a few months ago, I believe it was about November, December, the system crashed. This time it was slow, so we have to get it better, and we've asked to be talking with the top ranks of that organization, say we need to do better. How do we make it more functional for residents so that they can be able to sign up? The one thing that we're looking at doing is spreading out the actual dates of registration for different programs, so that not everybody's trying to call for every program on the same day at the same time. We'll assess how that works in the next registration period and see if there's a way, in consultation with the vendor, that we can improve this.
Perfect. And how about, do we have anything in the budget for our increased demand for the recreation programs, such as staff or?
Through the chair, maybe I'll ask Anand the Director of Recreation, to weigh in about some of the other additions that we've added in the budget.
Thanks, Chief. Through the chair, so one of the issues, Councillor Brar, is it's not really the budget, it's the lack of staff. We are struggling with part-time staff, which is direct program delivery staff. So it isn't a function of the budget, but it's more getting staff to come back out and consistently be able to deliver programs on our behalf.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brar. I'm going to ask for one piece of additional information for when we approve the capital and operational budgets. And I'd love to see what the wait list is for each sport, to make sure that we're attending to the service demands. And so if there is particular sports where the wait time is longer, I think it's important for us to have an awareness for that. Our goal has always been to make it as easy as possible for residents to stay active and healthy in our community. And just from my observances, whether it's field hockey or cricket or soccer, there seems to be escalating demand. And for example, sadly, a sport that I love, hockey, you can rent ice time on the weekend in prime time and still get availability the day before. And so I just like to have that on an annual basis update on what the demands are in each sport, to make sure that we're continually doing our best to reconcile our funding with what the demands of the community are. So if I could get that before this is debated in its final form, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, certainly. We'll put that together, Mayor, briefing note, and get it to you and Council.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the presentation, moved by Councillor Santos, seconded by Councillor Fertini. All those in favor, motion carries. Proceed. Received. It's 4:10. I think we can, probably don't have enough time to get through another presentation. We probably don't have enough time? Yeah. So why don't we continue tonight, and we're returning tonight at 7 p.m. So we'll see everyone here tonight at 7 p.m. and thank you for all the staff who presented today for for what were some very thorough presentations. Your recess.